Students for Life has estimated that approximately 40 tons of medical waste is being put into the water system.
Welcome back to Straight Talk on Life Issues. I'm Victor Nieves, as always, joined by Brad Mattis, president of Life Issues Institute. Today's topic is something that you probably haven't thought much about. A quick disclaimer, the nature of today's program is somewhat graphic. We're going to be talking about the effects of chemical abortion and specifically the impact of its tiny victims going into our water.
You know, it's been estimated that 63% of abortions are at-home abortions because of the availability of the chemical abortion pills. I think, Victor, that's closer to 70% if we really took a close look at that. But over time, we're talking about millions of babies and millions of women all being victimized. And now it's going to impact all of us, it appears, in the water system.
That's because there's estimated to be about 40 tons of chemically tainted human tissue, placenta, and fetal blood that's entering our wastewater systems every single year.
And I'm sure we're all cringing along as you, the listener, with us. You know, the sad news is those numbers are going to increase. And what we're talking about has the potential of impacting nearly every single household. This is a public health emergency.
Yes, it is. And today we're going to talk about it with John Stemberger, an attorney, author, and president of Liberty Counsel Action, as well as senior counsel for the public interest law firm Liberty Counsel. We're also joined by Abigail Forman, a public policy analyst and a writer for Liberty Counsel Action. She previously worked as the director of public affairs for Right to Life UK and served in the Minnesota House of Representatives for 2 terms. Abigail and John, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
It's an honor. Thank you.
John, let's start with you. Just what's happening to our drinking water? Specifically, are at-home abortions impacting what we drink?
So it's a great question. There's a lot that we know. There's a lot that we don't know. What we know is that approximately 700,000 women a year, it used to be the chemical abortion when the drug was first approved, was a very small thing. So the FDA didn't really consider it to be a big thing. Now it is approximately 70% of women are choosing chemical abortion, sadly. And as a result, there's an enormous number of women who are basically delivering their dead babies with fetal remains and human waste going into their toilet. That then is flushed and goes into a sewer system or a septic tank for local home, or it goes into city water treatment, one of the two, depending upon the location. Those treatment plants were really not designed to handle human waste, placenta, cranial development, bone development, the tissue that's really tough and elastic and is not easily dissolved the way other waste products are. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is the drug that actively kills the baby, mifepristone. That is not a forever chemical because it's not necessarily synthetic, but it's something that stays around. It doesn't just die. It's not absorbed. It's an active metabolite. Once expelled from the mother's body, it continues to have a life in the water. We're really not sure at all. It does appear that there's evidence that trace elements of mifepristone are still in our water, especially in cities like Austin or Los Angeles, where you have a very dry climate, where they're recycling their water. It's a desert climate, so to speak. That is going to still be there. There's also a higher population there, higher number of chemical abortions. So in those kinds of cities, there may be a higher increase level. And in cities like rural places or cities that don't have much population, there may be lower levels. The point is that the government is not looking at any of this. They're not testing it. They could very easily begin to monitor all over the country the amounts of mifepristone.
Thank you, John. Abigail, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, and I'll just echo John. He did a great overview. And it's a question that we need to do further research on, to be quite honest. That's what the federal government was supposed to do back when it approved the pill in 2000 and failed to do. So essentially, like John said, it's generating medical waste. It's the first drug. It's a novel drug that was introduced in 2000, and it generates medical waste. No other drug on the market does that. Medical waste is a pollutant if it is disposed of improperly. That's what we're doing. That's what abortion providers have been doing for decades. They've evaded these medical waste laws because of oversights made by the FDA and the EPA. Additionally, I think just expounding on what John said about the mifepristone metabolites. That's the other issue. So we have the two issues, the medical waste and the mifepristone metabolites. When you take any drug, it goes into your body metabolizes it. A lot of those drugs that you take, including mifepristone, form what are called active metabolites. Now, those active metabolites can retain the therapeutic effects of their parent drug. So that means that if you take a drug like mifepristone that blocks a chemical like your fertility hormone, progesterone, that can remain active. That ability to block progesterone can remain active after you excrete it. So in your urine and your feces, you excrete it, it goes into the wastewater system, and wastewater treatment plants are not designed to remove these active metabolites. We know this, it's been studied. We know that there are lots of pharmaceuticals with their active metabolites in our drinking water supply. We also know that some of these active metabolites are in our drinking water. What we don't know, whether and the extent to which mifepristone metabolites are in our drinking water supply and how it could be affecting us. But that is what we need to study.
Yeah, and right now I can just hear you, the listener, having an ick factor to what Abigail and John just shared, but stick with us. There's more really important information to come.
Abigail, can you share a little bit of background about the water assessment that was performed back in 1996?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 1996, the Population Council, which is the entity that applied for the drug's approval. So when you apply for approval from the FDA, it's a new drug application, and you're required to do an environmental assessment. This environmental assessment, performed again by the entity that wants the drug to be approved. Could there be any bias there? We'll throw that out there. So they want the drug to be approved, and they looked at the plant emissions. So when you produce a drug, the plant itself will produce some emissions. Okay. They looked at the drug packaging, the waste packaging materials of the drug. And when you dispose of it, it's going to have some wrappers and things like that you want to make sure you throw in the garbage. Then they also looked at the excretion that can be caused by patients. And that's something that they calculate with their expected introduction concentration. So when a new drug is introduced, they estimate, essentially, they calculate what they would expect to be the concentration of the drug in the environment. If that concentration is low enough, according to their calculations, they're going to say no further study is needed, no further study is required. This is what happened. And this happens a lot. Two issues with that with regard to mifepristone. One, again, this entirely failed to consider the issue of medical waste. So say that's true. Say there's a really low concentration of mifepristone in the water and say it doesn't affect us. I would disagree with that. We don't know that. But you still certainly should have considered the environmental impact of disposing of medical waste into our water supply. So that's one thing. The other thing is that this is absolutely clear violation of the Clean Water Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. All right, so the Clean Water Act specifically says that an agency that is undertaking an activity that could result in the discharge of pollutants needs to consider all the relevant state and local laws related to that activity. So state and local laws on water quality, state and local laws on medical waste, all of these can affect the control and abatement of water pollution. So according to the Clean Water Act, the FDA should be considering every state law, and some of them are quite extensive. If you look into it, Minnesota has, I think, 7 different classifications of water. They need to ensure that their approval, their action, their activity that they have undertaken to approve a drug complies with, would not violate all these water laws, all these medical waste laws. They clearly failed to do this. It's a clear violation of the Clean Water Act.
There's a common sense to this. I mean, the EPA recommends against putting even baby wipes in the toilet, right? We don't allow goldfish to be flushed, gasoline, that kind of thing. And here we are literally putting thousands, tons and tons. Students for Life has estimated, which has done some amazing work in this area, I might add.
Yeah.
They estimate that approximately 40 tons of medical waste is being put into the water system. This is a tremendous amount. And when the FDA did this was a very small percentage of the overall abortions. Not only did they not consider, the FDA considered what it would do to the woman per se, but didn't consider the environment. They didn't consider the fact that women have to expel this in their home, that would go in the toilet. And they didn't consider the volume, the mere increase of this, which now would be catastrophic and scandalous for any other thing to be put into our water supply. And so we're asking the government to look at this hard. President Trump, he's made a commitment. He wanted crystal clean water. He said it multiple times. He drank bottles of waters at Raleigh. He did this multiple times. Since day one, he wanted the cleanest water and air in the world for generations. That's an exact quote. So we're asking basically the entire administration and all the agencies, specifically the EPA and the FDA, to reevaluate this, shut down chemical abortions, study it, monitor it. We need to be red alert on this whole thing. Because it's abortion, everybody's like, hands off. No, we can't do that. We have to look at this objectively. If America understands that their water is being poisoned by chemical abortions, there's going to be a tremendous backlash. And so we want the government to act and act now.
Well, the women I've talked to, John and Abigail, many have told me that they were advised to flush their babies down the toilet after the chemical abortion. So that is being done. And did you say 40 tons a year?
That's
John?
The current estimate that Students for Life has made.
And so you, the listener, this is just a profound thing that they've just shared with us. We're talking about 40 tons estimated of unborn babies, placenta, and whatever goes with that into the sewer system, into the water system of our nation. That has got to be an absolute horrific revelation for many people.
Yeah, so like John said, like you just summarized, 40 tons of medical waste in any other context. Think of a hospital just dumping 40 tons of medical waste down the drain.
Yes.
That would be a national scandal. It's a travesty that this has been overlooked as much as it has been overlooked. And medical waste laws exist in every single state. They exist for a reason. It's infectious material. It's material that's meant to be incinerated generally or disposed of in other ways. And I won't go into all of them. Some of them are a little bit disturbing, but they exist for a reason. And yet abortion providers have essentially evaded these laws using toilets, using these unsuspecting women as their own personal medical waste facilities. But as the generator of the medical waste, the abortion provider, so the abortion provider is the one that sends the pill. There would be no medical waste if it weren't for that abortion provider. So they're the ones generating the medical waste. At least that's a pretty clear argument I think we can make. And they are the ones that should be responsible for disposing of the medical waste.
If you think about an abortion clinic, they can't just flush unborn babies after they're aborted down the drain. They have to use proper medical waste facilities. They hire a company that comes out, they put it in a giant barrel. If you saw the movie Unplanned, it was a very graphic scene where they took the barrel out in the truck and they incinerate it, right? They burn it in some way that doesn't go into the environment. But what's happening is that abortion clinics, abortion providers, and the pharmaceutical companies that are producing these things, they're bypassing that and allowing this to go directly. So the abortion providers, as somebody just said, they're instructing them to deliver their dead babies in the toilet. Not only does this create increased psychological trauma for the woman in a normal abortion setting, you have a quote unquote doctor who is really doing the evil act. In this situation, you have the mother who is actively putting the pill in her mouth. She's actively seeing the dead baby in the toilet, interacting with this. The toilet and the bathroom then becomes a triggering place in her whole life, a place that ought to be a place of refuge and rest, and now is a triggering to this horrible act that she committed. And so there's psychological trauma that's exponentially more from a chemical abortion, not to mention the environmental issues that we're now seeing that affect our water.
Yeah, a friend of mine who's experienced chemical abortion laments the fact that her unborn baby is buried in her parents' septic system.
Wow.
And whenever she visits her parents' home, that's a reality that she has to live with. I'm so glad you brought up the emotional piece here. I want to ask you about the fertility issue. There is concern that this is having an impact on fertility. Abigail, do you want to begin by addressing that?
As I mentioned earlier, mifepristone forms active metabolites, and those can remain active in our water supply. We also know that mifepristone blocks progesterone. That's a vital fertility hormone. In fact, I have friends who take progesterone while they're pregnant because it's so vital to fertility. If we have an active substance in our water that's blocking a vital fertility hormone, that is something that we need to be incredibly concerned about, given that infertility is on the rise. 1 in 6 people are affected by infertility. It's such a crisis that Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK, has said they're going to investigate the causes of infertility, this issue of infertility in the United States, including by looking at endocrine disruption. So endocrine disruption, that's chemicals that can affect your body's hormones. They block, mimic, or interfere with your body's hormones. Clearly, mifepristone acts as an endocrine disruptor. Other endocrine disruptors are also coming under very strict scrutiny from the EPA. You've probably heard of PFAS or forever chemicals. Those are being regulated by the EPA. At incredibly low concentrations, these chemicals that disrupt your body's hormones can cause incredible harm over time. So the EPA is monitoring them at 4 part per trillion. So 2 of these chemicals are being monitored at 4 part per trillion. What did the FDA say back in 2000? Less than 1 part per billion, we're fine. Don't worry about it. When actually there are chemicals that at very, like in the trillions can cause significant harm over time because mifepristone also acts as an endocrine disruptor, because it clearly is a vital fertility hormone. All we're saying is that we need to be asking the questions. Could this be part of the infertility crisis that's happening in our nation? We know drugs, we know these metabolites could be in our drinking water. Let's find out the extent to which they may be. Let's find out if this is part of the infertility crisis. And it fits right in with RFK's agenda to have gold standard science. President Trump wants gold standard science, fits right in with the agenda to figure out and investigate with the infertility that is happening in our nation.
It certainly does. And it seems like common sense that this would be an issue that needs to be addressed. John?
Yeah, the other issue that we don't know about is that, and I don't know if infertility means you can't conceive but arguably this drug is designed to basically attack the progesterone, which is the life-giving support and nutrients to the unborn child. And if that continues to remain in somebody's system in higher amounts from drinking water over time, it could be causing miscarriages, because you may be having a situation where that active metabolite in the water is actually affecting the ability to conceive in that child, to grow in the mother's womb. And so this, again, has not been tested. We don't know about this. It's a scandal that we're not even looking at this, right? It's one thing to ignore. It's another thing to not even know the facts. So we're asking the EPA, the FDA, the White House, everybody, Congress, look at this issue. We have to study this. We can't ignore it. We can't say, oh, it's about abortion. It's too controversial. We're not going to do that. We must look at this.
And just piggybacking off that. So like John said, back when this drug was approved in 2001, so it was approved in 2000. In 2001, chemical abortions accounted for 6% of the overall abortions. Now, like John said, it's easily 70%, at least 63% in 2023. 2 years later, we know it's increasing. We also know there's underreporting. So you have 1 million abortions, over 1 million abortions a year. 70% of them are being conducted with these pills, this chemical abortion. It's going into our water. So you see, at the same time as chemical abortions are increasing, you see an increase in infertility. It's a clear correlation. So as my husband would say, hear what I'm saying, don't hear what I'm not saying. We're not saying it's causation yet. We're saying it very well could be. And because of the incredibly clear correlation, we're calling on the federal government to study this issue extensively in line with all the other things it has promised to study and investigate related to our health and clean water.
John and Abigail, it seems like so far, at least, when it comes to answering the question about whether or not mifepristone is harmful, dangerous in our water, rather than doing the studies themselves, FDA, EPA seem to be deferring to the abortionists, the abortion industry. That seems to me like it would be taking the word of the cigarette companies when they tell you that cigarettes are safe. Are we missing something here?
It's a great analogy. It's the fox guarding the hen house. Pharmaceutical companies are primarily interested in profit, secondarily interested in environmental impact and safety, health and safety. Many times things are just because of the process. This is what I love about what's happening in the current administration. They're going to the root of the problem. They're really looking at the forces that are twisting real truth and real science. So I think that that's encouraging. But ultimately, these agencies, the FDA and the EPA, they serve at the pleasure of the President of the United States. So the White House's leadership in this has to be critical. And we're asking the president to make sure that he follows through on his promises, right? He said he's going to do his promises. He called for crystal clean water. This is a part of that. You cannot have crystal clean water if we're dumping 40 tons of medical waste, 40 tons of human remains into the water system. You just can't have it. So we have to look at this seriously.
Abigail, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I think just as kind of talked about before, when you look at what is happening in our environment, just overall, this issue is something that should absolutely be studied as part of that Make America Healthy Again Commission recently released a report on children's health. And they're talking about all the environmental possible impacts and effects that different chemicals and different herbicides, pesticides, pharmaceuticals, etc., can have on children's health. That's the same for all human health. And they're going to look at, one of their recommendations is to gene map all of these possible interactions with endocrine disruptors, etc., the impact they have on our health. So, if we're going to go sit with the folks that are conducting these studies, we would just absolutely say, please include, we're almost begging you, include mifepristone in these studies, in part because you can. We know that they can monitor PFAS in the water. Why can't they monitor mifepristone as well? It certainly needs to be on their list of things to look at.
Well, Abigail, are there other pharmaceutical drugs that are affecting our water?
Absolutely. So there have been extensive studies and various over the years on various pharmaceuticals. Some of the most common pharmaceuticals studied are hormones from contraception, antidepressants, antibiotics. These pharmaceuticals and others, beta blockers, et cetera, they all get into our water supply. So again, they form their active metabolites. They go through wastewater treatment plants. Some of them are just dumped into the toilet. People. This is why you see all of those ads. Don't dump your unused pills down the toilet. But from excretion and from that, we see all of these pills that are entering our water. It's been well documented that the effects, for example, from hormones can cause the feminization of fish. We see other drugs that are causing death or mortality to green algae. We see other drugs, for example, that are causing cardiovascular impacts in zebrafish. So we know that pharmaceuticals have a very adverse impact in our environment. And like I mentioned before, we also know that drinking water treatment plants, so that's our water supply, that's what's in our natural environment. But drinking water treatment plants are also not equipped to fully remove all these pharmaceuticals. And so in I want to say 2009, 2015, in that range, there was a two-phase study done by the U.S. Geological Survey and the Environmental Protection Agency on pharmaceuticals in our drinking water. Very illuminating. They found 26 different pharmaceuticals in treated drinking water. So we know that pharmaceuticals are in our drinking water. What we don't know and what has not been extensively studied is the impact of these pharmaceuticals on human health over time. Even if it's at very low concentrations, if that's what you're drinking every single day for your entire life, and we know that the use of pharmaceuticals, including mifepristone, is on the rise, there clearly is something very troubling and concerning about this reality that needs to be investigated and studied. So that's, again, one of the things that we're calling on the federal government to do. Because this is something that could be adversely affecting our health, will you please study it and will you please do something about it so that we can protect our health for generations to come?
Well, Abigail, I think the average listener to this program will wonder why the filtration system of water does not catch all of these drugs and filter them out. Can you give a little more detail on that?
So traditional wastewater treatment plants, when they were designed, and I don't know this for certain, but just when they were originally designed, we didn't see the massive amounts of pharmaceuticals that are being used today. The pharmaceutical industry has become a giant that is its own problem. That's an entirely other radio program, right? But we know that they weren't designed with the idea that we need to remove all of these microscopic metabolites in our water, so they get through. There has been recently work and study and research done on treatment processes that could remove them. So advanced treatment processes, which are not as common, they're more expensive to implement, they can remove quite a bit, up to 99.99% of pharmaceuticals. Not all pharmaceuticals and not all treatment plants. But again, these have their own issues. So they're more emerging technologies. They don't remove all of the pharmaceuticals. They also are going to be, at times, depending on which advanced treatment, they produce their own different toxins. They're byproducts from these treatments that are going to cause their own different environmental concerns. So that's an issue. And you see that, for example, in rural communities, if you want to implement these technologies, it's going to be a lot more expensive and probably impractical for these communities to do that. The other thing, just to keep in mind, even if we were able to do that, it would take a long time to do for the entire United States. And I would caution against any complacency in the issue, like, oh, well, eventually, somewhere in like 50 years time, we might be able to deal with this issue by treating the water well. You still have the disturbing reality that we are flushing babies down the toilet. That is something that you cannot address no matter how much you disinfect the water.
Mifepristone, it's a lethal drug. I mean, it's designed to destroy a developing human being.
Yep.
Because of that alone, it creates a whole nother class of seriousness for this particular drug than all the other chemicals, pharmaceuticals that are perhaps in the water.
Absolutely.
I think that, in terms of just, again, we've been talking about infertility, miscarriages. We don't know. we don't know. And yet this drug is designed to basically destroy an unborn child developing in the mother's womb. So if that is in our systems, male or female, we just don't know how it's going to affect the development of human reproduction from the time of conception till birth.
You're right, John, because the design of the drug is to kill babies, and the impact could be far more profound than we realize.
Well, it specifically attacks the progesterone, right, which is the life
Mhm.
force that the baby gets its food from and water from and all that, in addition to the umbilical cord. So, but it's the sustaining thing that the child has.
Well, in thinking of ways to fix this problem with mifepristone specifically, Abigail, you talked about upgrades in the water filtration system, which of course has its ups and downs as far as realistically taking care of that. Do you think that the FDA may look at this and put back in place the original protections and limitations on this drug? And would that in itself take care of this environmental issue?
Really, really great question. The easy answer is no. So putting back into place the original safety protocols is not going to address the environmental issue, because even with those original safety protocols, women were still expelling their babies in the toilets at home. So what you need to do, what is absolutely vital, is if the FDA does its job, and kudos to the Trump administration for putting in place new folks that hopefully will do this correctly. But at any rate, what we see now is an opportunity to address these past harms, these past mistakes. So what you want to do is request the FDA and the EPA do its due diligence and actually study the effect of mifepristone in the water, actually study the effect of medical waste in the water, consider what that could be doing and how it should actually be disposed of. While they are doing that, we need to be suspending the current approval of the drug. That's the ideal scenario. Once the environmental study is done in accordance with the Clean Water Act and in accordance with the National Environmental Policy Act, so actually do the environmental assessment, the environmental impact statement properly, consider medical waste, consider all these state laws, then determine what do we need to do. Because if this was done in the first instance and back in 1996, back in 2000 properly, if it was done properly, they would either not have approved the drug for use, or they would have required women to remain in the clinic while they expel the entire contents of their uterus, while they expel this medical waste that is being generated, so that it can be disposed of properly. And just so you all know, I hate talking about this issue that way. We should not be killing babies, period. But if you don't agree with me on that, at the very least, can you agree that we shouldn't be putting medical waste into the sewer system? Okay, so that's one aspect.
Even if they stay in the abortion facility to pass their dead baby, they bleed for weeks, is what's commonly done. Is that not still contamination of the water system?
Yeah, and that's, again, the great question. This is why we should suspend the use of the drug until it's fully studied. They need to study these effects of mifepristone in our water. And if they determine, hey, all these mifepristone metabolites are causing too much harm, yeah, the drug needs to just be taken off the market. And in states that still allow abortion, it will require surgical abortions. I believe that all abortions should be banned, but at the very least, the abortions that are causing environmental harm or potentially causing harm to animal and human health certainly need to be addressed, taken off the market.
In the interest of trying to find solutions in every possible way, Students for Life has also proposed the idea that there could be a catch kit that's given to the woman, that's sent home, that has ability to catch this in the toilet, so it's not. But if you saw the movie Unplanned and you saw what Abby had to go through, I mean, you're talking about potentially days of just retching pain, cramping, bleeding, the uterus not coming out cleanly, but it taking quite a while, moving from the shower to the bathroom to the tub to the toilet. So it's not something that you can easily catch. It's a good idea, but again, it's a very complicated idea and a very just gory, grisly idea to even think about. But again, we're trying to exhaust every possible thing. And then, of course, the other things Abigail spoke about was requiring the clinics to have the women stay there. They would have to improve their infrastructure and create more places for them to stay for longer periods of time, because this doesn't happen instantly, right? And then you also have the first pill, which kills the baby. The second pill expels the baby. Usually it's about 24 to 48 hours, but the after effect of that can take weeks in terms of the hemorrhaging and the bleeding that takes place. So it's a complicated issue. It just shows, it goes to the nature of how brutal chemical abortion is, even than surgical abortion. It is just absolutely horrible. And the woman often goes through this procedure with nobody there. There's no attendants, there's no doctors, there's no nurses. And often we're finding evidence, this is anecdotal, but we're finding evidence here in Florida that some women may be going to hotel rooms because they don't want to experience this in their home with other people there, capturing maybe the one bathroom in the home for hours and hours and days at a time. So we're finding evidence, some maids have indicated that there may be evidence of chemical abortions happening in hotels where they're just kind of retreating there and hunkering down until they can deliver their dead babies in those toilets as well.
Yeah. And to you, our listeners, we apologize for the graphic nature of this program, but it is essential information that you and I need to have, and we need to share that with others.
John and Abigail, if you could speak personally with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., if you could speak with Donald Trump, what would you tell them about this issue?
I'll let Abigail take RFK and I'll take Trump.
I guess honestly, if I were talking to RFK, first things first, I would thank him. I'd thank him for all the work he's done with children's health defense. I'd thank him for all the work, the amazing promises he's made to investigate the actual causes of infertility, to investigate chemical abortion and things of that nature. And I would just implore him, because I understand him to be a person of faith as well, if he has the opportunity to make an impact and to change what is happening in our nation in terms of chemical abortion, I would say take that opportunity, because when you get to heaven, you are not going to regret it. That's the plea I would make to Kennedy.
So to the President of the United States, I would just say, Mr. President, we know that you have a more nuanced position regarding abortion as to when it should be banned. We know that you've taken positions that seem to allow chemical abortions, but there's new information that you need to evaluate. The water issue is paramount to every citizen. Everybody's concerned about water. And when you have the intersecting of these two issues, water has to be paramount. And so he needs to revise his position. And he's done this many times. We really respect the fact that when he's given new information, when he's briefed in a way that he hasn't heard, he has pivoted. He's not kind of hunkered down and said, no, this is my position, I'm not going to change it. He does watch the science. He's interested in the facts. He's interested in his advisors. So we would ask him to turn to the EPA and the FDA. Now, remember, the FDA is concerned about the drug and how it affects the person. The EPA should be concerned about how it affects the environment. You need both of these agencies to interact and to activate. And we'd ask him to please release them, order them, in fact, because they serve at his pleasure, to begin to research, look into this, and initially order them, best case scenarios, to just put a hold on all chemical abortions. Surgical abortions would still be available, but chemical abortions need to be stopped until they're fully studied, the impact on the woman, the impact on the environment, and then we can take the next policy step from there.
I think Victor's question to you both about Secretary Kennedy and President Trump is very important, because I believe God has put these men together along with the FDA commissioner of people who will look at this. As you said, John, President Trump looks at the facts and his position is reflective of the truth. So we can be prayerfully hopeful and optimistic that we may see some considerable revelation coming from the White House on these pills. Is there anything else that either one of you want to bring up that we haven't discussed?
The National Environmental Policy Act requires any major action taken by the federal government that could significantly impact the human environment to produce a detailed statement on the reasonably foreseeable effects of that action. So again, a drug approval is a major action. What is significant? Well, significant is defined in the Code of Federal Regulations as something that could be considered controversial. I think we'd all say that this is considered controversial. It shouldn't be. It should be something objective, but it's controversial. Also, what is human environment? Human environment includes my relationship with the environment, which I would say is impacted by the knowledge that fetal remains are entering the environment. So we have an action approving this drug that's going to generate medical waste that is significantly, by virtue of its controversy, by virtue of the 40 tons of medical waste entering the water, affecting the human environment and my relationship with the environment. In such a scenario, the federal government should have considered the reasonably foreseeable impact. Again, all this medical waste. They failed to do every single one of those things. So when we're looking at asking the FDA, asking the EPA, will you redo this? There is a clear basis in law for doing so. And just so all the listeners here understand as well, we're going to be looking at this a little bit more in depth. But if you are able to take action, please email your state representatives, email your federal representatives, your congressmen, your senators, ask them to take action, because that will influence the FDA as well. There was, in 2024, members of Congress actually did write to the EPA. Under Biden, nothing happened. We're hoping that if members of Congress write again, something might actually happen.
Do you think, Abigail, that the head of the EPA will be a good person to follow through on this?
So Secretary Lee Zeldin, he's great. He's looking at PFAS in our water. He's looking at these other chemicals in our water. And I think that if we are able to speak to him alongside FDA commissioner, alongside RFK, et cetera, there's a very good chance that we're going to see action taken on this, but it's not going to be without action, and it's not going to be without prayer. The prayer of the saints and the action that goes along with that by contacting your congressman is vital.
Brad, Liberty Council Action, the organization that we're with, founded by Matt Staver, we're making this a number one priority. I mean, we do many things in Congress. Jonathan Alexander is on the ground lobbying on a number of issues. But as an organization, we want to come alongside Students for Life, who's done more work than anybody on this, and really make this the focus of what we're trying to do. People that are outraged and want to take action, one of the goals is to have a congressional hearing. This is an interesting issue. It's obvious, it's out in the light, but yet it's hidden. Nobody's talking about this. Nobody really understands this. It's kind of complicated. They assume that because my water is white and clear, oh, it's safe, it's fine, but that's not the case at all. And so we're asking people to call upon Congress to do a congressional hearing. The public needs to be made aware of this. Congress needs to call people in respectfully and say, why aren't we looking at this? Why aren't we studying this? What are the facts? Let us know what's happening. It's a scandalous thing that we're not talking about it. And so we're asking people to just write your congressman and ask them to hold a public hearing. Congress needs to act, a congressional hearing, so that the entire world can be made aware of the facts and the things we don't know. That's even more scary than the facts. The things that we do know are clear. We know that all this is going into the water system, but what we don't know is how it's affecting us. And that's what Congress needs to act upon, and what you as a listener can actually do.
That's great advice, John. And what we are going to do is provide a link on lifeissues.org, and they will be connected with their existing representation in Congress. Thank you for adding that. I want to thank you both for bringing your knowledge to a program that is an issue that many people have no idea is taking place. Many probably prefer that they wouldn't have heard this information, but once you have to act on that. You have to share it with others and make this known. Just another huge reason that chemical abortion is not just deadly for the baby, it impacts the mother. And now we're finding out it impacts all of us. So thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Well, Brad, what we've heard here today is, well, for one, it's eye-opening, but for two, it's deeply troubling. This is something that I can imagine our listeners right there with us hearing about. The horror of what's going into our water is something that no matter who you are, whether you're pro-life, maybe you haven't made up your mind, no one should be able to say that we shouldn't be looking into this and doing real, rigorous research on just how dangerous it is to have these chemicals in the very water that we're drinking.
Yeah, and you said it at the top of the program. John repeated it, but let's repeat it one more time. 40 tons of human waste, 40 tons of unborn babies, 40 tons of placenta, 40 tons of umbilical cord are estimated to go into our water system. That is an issue that should drive action by those in Washington, D.C., and by those of us who are aware of this to push for that.
And like we've seen with other issues surrounding the chemical abortion drug, not only is it dangerous, but it seems that every time that the government has touched a study involving this dangerous pill, they've blundered it. They have managed to throw away all of the protections that we expect the FDA or the EPA to ensure whenever it comes to these things being in our environment or in our water. They seem to just continue to ignore it. And a lot of this goes back, Brad, to the financial incentives of the abortion industry and the foolish decision that people in our government made to trust blindly people who have a financial incentive.
Yeah. And, many of us, I think you and I included at the beginning of this, thought that the water system filtration system would take care of all of these impurities and take them out. And sadly, we've learned that they don't. And that means that every one of us likely are being impacted, some with their fertility and others with their health in ways that is beyond our control.
And on that note, I want to recommend to you, our listener, to visit our website, lifeissues.org. There you'll learn more about the dangers of chemical abortion, but also specifically the dangers regarding the environment and our water supply. I want to encourage you to share that information. Share this program with your friends, your family members, your community, so that together we can continue to draw attention to this extremely important issue. While you're at our website, lifeissues.org, I also want to encourage you to join our mission and become a member of the Life Defenders today. You can help us create a culture of life across America, and your monthly donations enables the very creation of this program. So help us do more for the babies by becoming a Life Defender today. Again, you can easily sign up on our website, lifeissues.org, and be sure to tune in next week for another Straight Talk on Life Issues.